Welcome to our Meet the Experts film editing panel. Today, we're joined by William Goldenberg from Air, Hilda Rasula from American Fiction, Victoria Boydell from Saltburn, Michael Andrews from Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and Michael Harte from Still, a Michael J. Fox movie. Thank you all for being here. We know editors have to do lots and lots of cuts and lots of adjustments. It's a lot of trial and error. So I'm not sure how you can explain this exactly, but how do you know when it's the right cut? Is it just kind of instinctual? Is it just like talking with the director over and over again and you both agree like this is it? Billy, let's start with you.
Well, I think it's a combination of all those things. And then, I feel it's right by instinct, and then you do a first cut and show it to the director, and he may have a different idea of what feels right, or he or she may have a different idea of what feels right, but then we'll come to a consensus of what feels right. And then ultimately you show it to an audience and see what they think, early screenings with friends and family or who don't know anything about the subject, aren't in the movie business, and see how they, when there's an audience in the room, you get a real sense of what's right and what's not right, what's working and what's not working. So I think that it's sort of a step-by-step process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Victoria, you got a lot of polarizing reactions to Saltburn.
That's true. For me, it's kind of about the journey. I'm sure, as everyone knows, certainly here, there's a million ways to cut a film. There's a million ways to cut each scene in a film. And I feel that when you're at the end of the journey, and, it could be because everyone tells you you're at the end of the journey because they're all happy and the money's run out. But for me, it's an emotional journey, and Emerald and I tried so much. There was no stone left unturned in cutting Saltburn, and while I was in it, I was so in it, I didn't know we were near the end. Usually with a film, I can tell there's a crucial screening where all the execs, the financiers, everyone looks at you and they're like, yeah, basically we're happy with the film, and just you'll be done in 10 days time or something. With Saltburn, we were so in it and so immersed in it. I wasn't quite sure when we would feel that we'd arrived at the cut, and then suddenly a few weeks later we looked at each other and we're like, I think we're ready to put this to bed now. And
we also just have to let it go, right? So
I think that's what we felt. I think we felt like we've been locked in this room, and we're probably going to start going around the houses again and trying things that we tried 5 months ago. And actually, a lot of things we were trying, we were going, no, let's go back. And I think we just 1 week, we both looked at each other and we're like, I think probably we should stick to this current schedule now, and let's stop in 10 days time, whatever. So It was about the journey. We knew when we'd come to the end of the road.
Yeah. Michael Andrews, how about you? And Spider-Verse, it was 2 years for you total on the film.
Yeah, and the blessing and the curse of animation is you're working on storyboard form from the get-go, so you're helping basically write the film, and you can throw massive sequences away and start completely over if you need to. So sometimes I'll at the end of a movie I'll go back and I'll look at our first versions of sequences and just go, oh my God, what were we thinking? How did we even get from point A to point B? Because it was terrible. Like the first passes are usually really bad, and so you have to do a lot of work to find a way. And you always have that production deadline hovering, and you want to get it as good as you can by the time you get there. When I'm working on a scene, and I work with various directors, but the ultimate say is Phil Lord. This is his baby, and he's very funny. While I'm playing something back, he'll verbalize aloud like, "Great, there, yeah," and that's when I know, okay, at least we're getting somewhere. He's pleased. But ultimately, you do get a little numb to it, and you don't really know until you sit, and you really have to sit with the audience and watch it in a preview and see how they respond, because sometimes you're surprised at how something you thought was working isn't, and sometimes some things are working better than you thought. So you really need the feedback.
You need a UI
Yeah.
sometimes. So.
Yeah.
Hilda, how about you?
I think everyone said exactly how I feel about this issue. Trust your gut. I think you also have to really know what movie you're cutting. It's I mean, at least with American Fiction, that was kind of our hugest challenge was tone and rhythm, because this was a movie where we had great actors, we had an amazing script, a really good foundation. So those are all things you go into a movie thinking, okay, we have the best ingredients to begin with. But then finding the tone and rhythm of this one was intense and took a lot of work. We spent a long time going around and around. We ended up omitting like 11 scenes from the film, which for a movie of this scope was, kind of a fair bit. We very late in the game did a big Act 1 restructure. I mean, we really needed time to find it. And the only thing that could keep us going, I mean, the script is always the North Star, but is that inner voice and instinct that tells you, I know what kind of movie I'm cutting. And you have to trust that voice and keep searching out that film. And in this particular one, it was a very delicate balance of tone and rhythm. And we just had to work hard for it,
Yeah, it was multiple tones. That was the thing. So yeah. Michael Harte?
Yeah, I think actually it's very instinctual for me. I kind of I like to watch everything before I lay an edit on the material, which drives directors mad, because in documentaries there's a lot of material to get through, but I struggle to cut anything until I've seen everything, and I ask for the time to do that. But what I end up doing is then I start, once I know all my material, I don't like to loosely assemble stuff. I'd like to dive in and not fine cut it, but get it pretty close to what I think it can be. Again, which can drive the director a little crazy because they want to ease into the edit. But then what I don't do, and I'm still on the fence whether it's a good idea or not, but I don't watch what I cut. So if I spend a day cutting, I'll definitely not watch it at the end of the day. And I try not, as Michael said, to become numb to my own edits and my own work. And I try not to get invested in the 4 days I've done creating this scene from archive material, whatever sources. I try to almost pretend that I didn't cut it, and I put that scene away and I'll move on to the next one. And they give me a structure to work with. And so a director goes a long time without seeing any of my work. But I work with a couple of good directors that I really now trust my process, I think. And then when we decide to watch some things, then I feel like I can really feel where it's working and where it's not, because I feel like I'm watching somebody else's material or somebody else's work, and it's a lot easier to pick that apart because it feels like I'm not as invested in it. And I just don't like to watch my work too much until near the end of the process, and then I really kind of we really spend a long time finessing and tweaking, and then, as William said, I think the key is then getting new eyes and getting an audience in to watch it. And it's amazing when you think you're in a good place and you start to show it with. I mean, the truth is, when I show it to my partner Claire, and it just is a different movie, and I can feel the bumps, I can feel where this is going wrong, and there's no more honest feedback than somebody picking up their phone and looking at it, and that's as good a note as you'll ever get about a scene.
It's
and
just
that's
crushing,
happened,
right? Yeah.
His game was back to the drawing board, but that's the process.
Well, oftentimes you guys have to work with temp music. So how do you feel about editing with temp tracks? And do you often wish you had the real score to work with? Mike Andrews, I know you had some of Daniel Pemberton's score, right, for Spider-Verse?
Yeah, I mean, luckily being a sequel, there was some stuff to go off of, which was great. And he also, in the early days of the second one, he submitted a whole bin of stuff that he was just experimenting with, and we use that a lot for action sequences and certain things. And it's amazing how much of what he was experimenting with way back then ended up in the movie. And even something that he put in for the opening credits was something I remembered from being from that bin. So I usually, yeah, I love to, we have to do like full sound effects, full music. We have to pretend like we're watching storyboards. And so we need all the audio help we can get to make it feel like we're watching a movie. So we go all in on that. And, I go to either like Daniel's general scores, like to try to keep it in his ballpark. But he's pretty diverse, so it depends on what movies he's done. But I also had the luxury of having Daniel down the hall from me here for about 3 weeks, and I was able to go back and forth with him, and it was fantastic because I've never had that opportunity to actually like go, oh, you know what, that thing you're working on right now, we just extended it 5 seconds, so sorry, and then he would shoot something back to me, and it was a great system. I wish it was going on for the whole movie though.
Yeah. Hilda, how about you?
American Fiction was an unusual film because Cord knew from the beginning he wanted to temp with jazz, which is a very tricky thing. I mean, not jazz scores necessarily, jazz. So it's very difficult to cut, of course. It's really syncopated, the rhythms, there are a zillion solos in jazz songs. It was that was a challenge, and one that we just kind of kept circling around and around as we were preparing for friends and family screenings, like, let's swap out this cue, let's figure out a different thing here. And then the movie, of course, needed movie music as well. It needed score, temp. So it was that was sort of a beast for a while, to be honest. I there are times when I was like, what I would give for a music editor, but luckily, I mean, I grew up in a household that my dad is a jazz head and has like 4,000 records in his house. So it was kind of a weirdly perfect fit that I was like, all right, I actually know how to do this. I can do it.
You're just familiar with jazz, so.
Yeah. No, I did. I called my dad on a few tracks where I was stuck. I called my dad and was like, Dad, help me out here.
So he's like a assistant, like music supervisor on the film too. So
yes. Yeah, my dad, an English professor, is an uncredited music professor. Yes.
Michael Harte, you had your Back to the Future scores and everything you could work off of for this.
Yeah, that was the easy one because it was pre-written, but I'm terrible because I use a lot of temp as I'm cutting, because like I said, I like to jump in and kind of not fine cut, but cut early doors, and I use temp all the time. And especially when you work in documentaries, there's the scheduling problem. You can't bring composers on early; it's too expensive. So you use temp for the longest time, and you kind of fall in love with it, which is half the job is not doing that and keeping the distance and thinking this is only for rhythm. I'm only using this for rhythm. I'm only using this to signify where we may or may not use music. But inevitably, sometimes the director and me falls in love with the music. And for Still, we had a really, really strong score temp on it that drove a lot of it. And I just worked on the Beckham series. It was the same. I used temp until we got the composer. But the difference on Still was we got John Powell, who's an amazing composer, to do it. And he hadn't done a documentary before. And so I said, look, I've got a score and here you go. And I got a temp score, so it'll be easy for you. And he was like, yeah, I'd love to see it take the temp off. I'm going to start from scratch, which I had never done. And so I struggled with it for the longest time. But I'm not going to argue with John Powell. He's incredible. And I listen to his music when I'm cycling to work. I was just like, this guy is a god. So, and he really pulled it off. He discovered something completely new that we could never have. And it worked. And it was, to be honest, it was a real lesson on this project as to my relationship with music in an edit. And that's down to John, how good he is.
Victoria, how about you?
I mean, I love playing with temp score. I always assemble with temp score and spend hours and hours trying 4 or 5 themes, and then seeing which one's got legs for returning to using again. It ends up, my temp score ends up being quite, heterogeneous, not quite as homogenous as obviously the score will end up being. And yes, it's easy to kind of fall in love with it. The unusual thing with Saltburn It's the first time I've come across a director who said, please screen the assembly with no music, which was bum clenching for me. I mean, it was a long assembly, and we have montages in there. We've got dance sequences. There was silence, and it was quite painful for me. But you know what? I would never tell Emerald she was right to her face, but she's not here. And there was some merit in it. So the reason she doesn't like to hear music is because she doesn't want to get wedded to that sequence dovetails into that sequence, into that one, because the music works. She wants to kind of coldly, coolly, analytically move blocks around. So I muted all my music and we moved stuff around, and only on our second or third pass, about a week or two before showing producers, she said, okay, we better start choosing music now. And thankfully we had really similar taste. So I unmuted quite a few. There were quite a few areas where I said, I'll just play you what I kind of cut to, what I assembled to. And then other stuff we sort of found together, but we were really in sync, thank God, with music. And I actually learned something through the process. I thought, you know what, there may be some kind of method in it. However painful screening an assembly to a director.
It's a very clinical approach, just no music, but it also kind of amps up the cringe aspect of the movie. Obviously, it's not the final cut, but
so her argument is, I want to know if something works or not, in its own right. My counter argument would be, I like to see stuff in the best presentation possible. My assistant on Saltburn is fantastic, and we're doing wonderful, temp sound effects and everything. And I want, if I can see something in its best light and it's not working, then there's no excuses. It's not working. It's too long. It's not working. It's in the wrong place. So you can argue it both ways, but it was a good learning curve for me.
Yeah, sure. Billy, Air is unique because it doesn't have a score, but it has amazing 80s needle drops, a lot of Tangerine Dream.
Yeah, the original script had several songs written into it. But then about a week or two before we started shooting, Ben said, I want to have a lot more songs in the movie than I was written. And he gave me a 80s playlist that was probably 3 or 4 hours worth of songs, and I grew up in the 80s too. So I had my own ideas about songs, and there was a real sort of trial and error process with all those songs. And always with 10 music, I tend to cut the scenes with no music. I don't want to be influenced by the rhythm of the music. I want the scenes that, have their own rhythm, to find their own rhythm, and then find music that works with that. Because I feel like it's easy to throw a piece of music on something and it fools you sometimes into thinking the scene's the right length, or music can give you the mistaken feeling that something's working better than it is. So I really try and work the scene as much as I can before I start, and get it to a point where I feel like it can play with or without music. And then, if it needs music to support it, and I'll put it in, but try not to do it where it's the music is making it work or not making it work, but with Air, like I said, there were so many songs we just kept, the more we put in, the better it worked. And, the ins and outs were masterfully mixed by Andy Nelson, who's, just an amazing re-recording mixer. And then when we were doing the actual score, we had a couple of composers in mind, and they were all busy, the ones we wanted to use. And meanwhile, we were shooting, and I started putting in, temp music from 80s movies, and a couple 90s movies, but mostly 80s movies. And Ben liked it so much, and it seemed to fit the movie so well, that we just, at some point he said to me, why don't we just buy all the temp music? And I had bought a couple of films I had done. We bought 1 or 2 cues with a composer. We just never felt like the composer, nailed it. But to do a whole film that way, I was like, sounds great, let's do it. So then I continued on putting in, temp music from other scores, and like I said, a lot of Tangerine Dream. And so it would all, I wanted to obviously feel like as of a piece, so that, I wanted, couldn't be all these different sort of tones and kind of styles of music. So, it ended up working great. And unfortunately, when we got to the end and we had to get the rights to all the music, that became its own nightmare, because you'd be surprised how many people don't know who owns music. The songs were a little easier, although we had to push and pull with the prices of the songs. But the 10 music, we had a lot of trouble sometimes finding. I think there were 25 people who had passed away that had written or either owned the music or wrote the music. And it was, so a few times we had to change cues out because we couldn't never find who owned the rights. I mean, you'd think that like Universal Studios or whoever would know who owned the rights to their music from movies of the 80s, but oftentimes they didn't. And we even got to the point where we were going on social media looking, are you the same so-and-so who wrote a score for, and sometimes we got lucky and sometimes we didn't. So it was a constant swapping out of things, trying to find, oh my God, this piece works so beautifully and we can't get the rights. And it was driving me crazy. And we'd have to find another piece. And it was quite a Herculean effort by our music supervisor to get it all cleared in time. And then we got towards the end and I said to Ben, we don't have an end. We have no music for the end credits because we don't have it. And we don't have any money to buy any more songs or any more score. It's too expensive. So we did find one of the remaining members of Tangerine Dream. We got in contact with him, and the end credit music he wrote is the only original piece of music in the movie.
Wow. So you have a little bit of everything. You have the purchase temp tracks, needle drops, and then original score for the credits.
Yeah, I mean, and in fact, the first piece he wrote was for the end credits we loved, but then we gave the movie over to Amazon and they said, this sounds a lot like U2, The Streets Have No Name, like to a point where I don't think we can have it. So we had to go back a couple of versions, because we had put him through, we had him write several versions. We had to go back a couple of versions because they thought we were going to get sued. So, and it turned out that the piece we used was better for the film anyway. So, it was it worked out in the best way possible. But it was, usually with temp music, I'm so sick of it by the time, because I've picked it all and I've worked with it, and as you're recutting, you have to keep it in sync, and it's just a whole nother job, and I love doing it, but then I'm so happy when the composer starts because we're going to get real music. And my only fault of that was I tend to like things more than I probably should from the composer, because I see an opportunity to get the temp music out, and get the real score in, so I have to be very careful when I hear a real score to be very, very, discerning about it, because my tendency is it's great, put it in, because it's not my temp music anymore, because I've lived with it for so long and I'm so anxious to have the real score that I have to be careful about liking things just because they're new,
Yeah, definitely. Well, unfortunately, we have to wrap, but it was so great speaking with all of you guys, and congratulations on all of your films. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Take care.
Good to see you all.
Yeah, bye.